feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Podcast, episode 136. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
I just wanna fly, wicka 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 wah wah wah.
I don't know
Put
why
your
we've had
arms
that.
around me, baby. Put your arms around me,
God,
baby. Sorry,
beautiful voice, a voice of an angel, Eric
I know.
Marchin. How are
With the
you?
voice of an angel. I'm great. I'm great. Thinking about Sugar Ray and Mark McGrath.
As one does,
Yep.
on a November 1st.
Yep.
Happy Halloween, everyone. Welcome to Christmas season. I don't know what the hell you want to call it. We're back with another episode. What are we going to talk about today? Who the fuck knows?
No Dump November.
We're just going to hang out. There's lots of news to talk about. Maybe there's some stuff we can talk about where maybe we talked about it in our Black Adam spoiler cast, which is a lost episode that no one will probably ever hear because we recorded something. The news broke about James Gunn and Peter Safran running DC Films. And then that whole conversation.
Starting today, actually.
Yeah. So that's, congrats to them. So that whole conversation we threw out the window because it was literally what's next for DC or what's next for the DCEU. And then we used Black Adam as a jumping off point. So everything we talked about was irrelevant within about half an hour after we recorded. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what else are we going to talk about? Maybe some Henry Cavill that ties into Black Adam. He's leaving The Witcher. Not a show that either of us watch, but I think it's pretty big news that he's being recast in the next season. And some other
Lupita
stuff. Who the hell
Nyong'o
knows?
joins A Quiet Place Day One from the director of Pig. So
Yeah.
that looks like it's going into production probably in the new year.
And they also confirmed that Quiet Place Part 3 is coming from John Krasinski, which we didn't know about until today as well.
An unlikely pairing of A24 and Friday the 13th to create a Crystal Lake series, which I would have never thought would happen. Yes, Brian Fuller is going to be the showrunner on it. So elevated horror in the slasher genre.
A24 Friday the 13th with Brian Fuller.
Yeah.
Huh. That sounds cool. I'm not against that. I know people really loved Hannibal.
I'll send you
right?
the link.
Or not? Is it Hannibal? Is that what the show
Hannibal.
was called?
Yep.
Yeah, that people really, really liked. And I mean, that's wild. That's cool. I didn't even see that.
Wow.
We'll talk about movies being over 3 hours long.
We Babylon and Avatar, The Way of Water, which this episode will probably be dated because the new trailer for that movie, Avatar Way of Water, will be available on Wednesday.
Right. Which we'll talk about on the next episode, which is fine. Eric and I are going to LA. There's some news. We're going to be going to a Critics' Choice event for Glass Onion. So we'll talk about that, not on the next episode, but the episode after that. But we're in planning stages for all of that right now. Other than that, Eric, how's your Halloween? How's the last, couple days, last week? What you been up to? You watch any more spooky movies or what?
Matt, in the great words of Jonathan Frakes, have you ever been to a 1-year-old's birthday party? I attended my nephew Ivor's first birthday party, which was a lot of fun. It was a costume party, so I dressed up as the titular Jonathan Frakes of Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. Also, obviously known for Star Trek: Next Generation. It was fun because it was mostly kind of celebrating my brother Connor and his partner Nicole's first years being parents as well, and we got Ivor a smash cake, which was kind of shaped like a pumpkin with eyes, and he was terrified of it. So this will probably be one of the first reasons why he goes into therapy as a young adult, perhaps.
Right.
But it was nice. It was one of those things where it's like, the older you get, you kind of are less enthusiastic about maybe dressing up unless you kind of like doing the cosplay thing or what have you. So it's always kind of like a last minute, like, see what works and what you can kind of do or what's the bare minimum. So just wearing a black suit and having a beard and kind of looking like
There you
Jonathan
go.
Frakes kind of worked for me. So it was
Yeah.
like, I'm done. But I didn't realize what my other brother Kyle and his partner Heidi
Oh,
were
they crushed
coming
it.
as,
Yeah.
which was Heidi
Damn.
was Heidi was Vin Diesel, aka Dom Toretto, and Kyle was a car.
Yeah.
And the
I
car he
wasn't sure if he was
actually
Paul
made,
Walker in a car, like,
no,
or he was
no,
just the car.
that
Yeah.
would be in poor taste.
No,
No,
it's
he was just the car, and he actually like
made a
made the
cardboard car.
car.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
Like, I don't know if we can share that somewhere or send people to find it, but it's Eric might tweet it out. We'll see.
or just follow him
Um,
on Instagram.
yeah, yeah.
And then
Find him,
my
Kyle Martin.
brother Connor and his partner Nicole and my nephew Ivor were the Hill family, uh, Hank, Peggy, and Bobby. So
Nice. Yeah, I
yep.
went to a Halloween party as well. You can kind of see the remnants of it still as these temporary tattoos are slowly fading off of my arm, but I still have some of them on me. Yeah, I went as Carmy from The Bear. The Bear, everyone should go fucking watch if you haven't watched it yet. It is incredible. It's on Disney Plus here in Canada. It's on Hulu and FX in the US. Yeah, I took the lazy route this year as well, where, Nevis and I usually like dressing up every year. We do couples costumes most of the time. There was one year where I was Peter B. Parker and she was Paddington Bear, where, obviously Peter Parker and Paddington Bear aren't a couple yet. But
Multiverse.
um this year the vibes were a little bit off with Halloween. I don't know if the vibes were just off in general this year on some things. Maybe post-pandemic. We're actually still in the pandemic, but a lot of people think it's post-pandemic. um I wasn't like into the whole like figuring out an elaborate costume this year or even like putting something together. So last minute I was like, what can I do that's super easy? And then Neva sent me a photo and was like, hey, Carmy from The Bear, you need a white t-shirt, black pants, blue apron, some tattoos, and you're golden. um I was gonna commit to the bit and like completely like shave my face down to the skin and then and like get a
Get a sweet
wig
wig.
or something. But like if I just got a haircut in the last like week, so if I didn't get a haircut, I would have probably worked because I could have made my hair greasy and it was a bit longer. It would have worked. But I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Put some tattoos on my body. So I took like an hour to put all these temporary tattoos on my body. And I was like, there we go. And then I got one of those, like it's not Tupperware, but it's like chefs use them for like everything. And in the show, he drinks water out of that. So I'm like, I'll just hold that. I'll drink my drink out of that the whole night. And then I'm Carmy from The Bear, the titular bear from The Bear. So that's what I did. And the party was fun, I guess. It was typical Halloween get together. There was some punch. I didn't really drink. I'm just not much of a drinker anymore. Every once in a while I will, but I also went to like a Halloween concert on Wednesday, and I got drunk that night because we went out to dinner to Sugo, and we got some cocktails in another place. And I got drunk before the concert where it was just a quartet playing Halloween music, like scores from Halloween movies and stuff like that. Um, and then also went to Sagra di Toronto, which was like an Italian restaurant here in Toronto, or a place called Familia Baldassare. They did this event 3 years ago, like right before the pandemic in 2019, where they do like an outdoor sagra, which are popular in Italy, where it's like a community comes together and you all eat food together and it's like a communal kind of thing. So we ended up going to that on Sunday after the Halloween party the next day. So it was a busy ass weekend. So I'm kind of like, I'm still reeling from it. Had to do groceries and shit yesterday and I was just like exhausted. But um other than that, like I haven't been watching much horror stuff. I did watch Doctor Sleep, the director's cut, with Nevis. That's like the one Halloween thing or like spooky movie, which it's not. The movie's not very scary at all, but like it was the kind of one in the mood for spooky season movie
You
we
don't think
watched.
child murder isn't scary, Matt? You sick.
In the movie it's a little goofy, but
Yeah.
it's like Rosie the Hat just is a funny character, really. It's unsettling at times, but like it's the way that they're like huffing their essence and stuff is just
Right.
um very silly. I still like the movie a lot. 3 hours and 2 minutes I think is the director's cut. Is a lot.
The
Um
Flaniverse.
and I had to enter the Flaniverse during Halloween season. Um but other than that, I've just been chilling. The director's cut of Doctor Sleep, you guys can go back and listen to our review of Doctor Sleep. I think, yeah, we reviewed it. I remember sitting in a Tim Hortons gas station place and doing that with you. I like the director's cut. It definitely fleshes out some more, and you can tell that like Flanagan probably would have liked to release that version, but it was way too long. Love the chapter based storytelling. Love that it gives a little bit more to Danny's story of what place he's at in his life, and as well as the young girl that the story's about too. I forget her name. I'm bad with this shit, um, but a solid movie. Just not. It's tough because The Shining is such a masterpiece, iconic kind of movie that following up that and especially on rewatch, I'm like, oh yeah, this isn't The Shining, but it's still an enjoyable movie if you can. And the director's cut is good.
Yeah, no, I haven't watched the director's cut yet, but I really did like Doctor Sleep, and I think it is the best version of that book, and also kind of, if you're going to make a sequel to, that is referencing Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, but also Stephen King's book, because the movie versus the book are two completely different things, while still thematically having a
Yeah,
lot of connections together. Because I mean, Stephen King has famously said that he does not like
yeah,
Stanley Kubrick's The
yeah,
Shining. So, it is a bit of a tightrope there to walk in terms of the continuity and what you're kind of referencing specifically. But overall, yeah, it's one of those films that I haven't revisited since we watched it. But if I do, or the next time I get a chance to see it, I will watch the director's cut, because I would be more interested to see kind of a fully realized version of the Flaniverse. And I do feel that he works best within sort of long form narratives in
absolutely, yeah.
television. Like, you look at Midnight Mass and, you know, uh, The Haunting
Hill
of Hill
House,
House and
yeah,
things like
Bly
that. Like,
Manor, yeah.
yeah, it feels like he works a little bit better with something where there's a little bit more time narratively to breathe, and explore individual characters and storylines that maybe are extraneous for a feature, but not so much for a TV show.
And I think in a 3-hour feature, it does undercut a little bit of the tension and turns it more into like a character drama than it does like a horror movie. Which is fine. Like I like that. I think he has great characters in all of his stuff. And I feel like when you focus on Rosie the Hat's group and you focus on what Danny's going through and his connection with this girl who also has The Shining and yeah, I think it becomes more of a character drama with some thrilling aspects. And then like it is on rewatch, like it is very silly at times. You kind of have to buy into it. Like um the Shining, I just feel like the tension in that movie is very different than they're very different movies. Um, it's just when you see Rosie the Hat and her whole group, and it's brutal when they're killing children, and then you see their fucking essence leave their body, and they're all like, like hovering over this kid, like huffing their essence, which I'm like, was that in the original cut? And I'm like when smoke actually comes out of their body and they're huffing it, that is in the original cut,
Yeah,
right?
and because
Yeah.
they're also putting
Yeah.
it in containers for
And
later on as
fucking
well,
huffing
right?
it, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just such a over the top kind of like The Shining. It's obviously still dealing in the supernatural, and there's like ton of supernatural elements to it, but it never goes into that territory where you're like, this is a little bit silly. Where this kind of does do that, but it ultimately wins you over even with its silliness. Like,
Yeah, Jack
um,
Nicholson's not wearing a hat in that one.
yeah, and I do love all the recasting in this. Like, I prefer that over digital de-aging and stuff like that, and which Flanagan could have easily done, right? But
Yeah.
I doubt Jack Nicholson or um Shelley or Shirley Duvall? What
Shelley.
Shelley, which she's coming back to do a new movie, right? After
Yeah,
20
new
years.
horror film. Yeah.
Um, but I know that she did not the whole thing with Kubrick on that movie and stuff too. But I doubt they would have come back and de-aged them. But I like the recasting of some of those characters, and I feel like it just works. Like you buy into that right away. Like that never feels. I think at first you're like, oh, is that supposed to be that? Oh, okay, I'm in on that. That's fine. So yeah, I don't know. I definitely think if you guys haven't watch Doctor Sleep, it's definitely worth seeing. It is an investment, even at 2.5 hours. So I don't blame people for seeing a 3 hour director cut of a horror movie and going, ooh, I don't know about that. And like, but I was in the right mood. Nevis hadn't seen it. It's been a couple years since we saw it and reviewed it. And I was curious about this director's cut because I heard it had chapter based storytelling, and I heard it just fleshes out some of the characters even more, and it definitely does all of that, and I enjoyed it. And now the next horror director's cut I want to see is Midsummer, because I haven't watched that director's cut yet either. Have
Yeah,
you?
it's no, I haven't. I have it sitting on my table as I'm looking at it now across there. But it's yeah, it's one of those movies where it's like I think you have to kind of be in a mindset for specifically something that Ari Aster has directed to revisit. I've seen Hereditary twice.
Yeah, his
Um,
movies are not ones where you're like, I'm in the mood for an Ari Aster movie.
yeah,
Like,
they're kind of like, you know, like you watch them when they get released and you kind of have that experience. And but not that they can't be there's a morbid sense of humor to them, or there's something that's rewatch like they are rewatchable, but they are emotionally draining at the same time, and they kind of, you know, very much kind of wander in morose and kind of misery porn a little bit, but not in a completely exploitative way, but more so in a, you know, this is going to take this is going to be your whole day, you know, if you watch this, like
yeah.
you're gonna have to like take the rest of the day off, you're gonna have to basically like lie
It's not
around
something you just
afterwards.
throw on and then
No, it's
like
not a casual Sunday afternoon
it's not
watch
on
in any way.
AMC half like at 3 p.m. on a Sunday, and you're like, "Oh, cool! I'll watch Midsummer Director's Cut."
Yeah, although it is interesting, and we've talked about this before on the show, where Midsommar really does seem to have sort of permeated pop culture in the last few years, where people are referencing it and dressing up in Halloween costumes, or like even being, you know, a kind of a launching off point on an episode of Good Mythical Morning, and so like there is something there where I think Midsommar kind of surpassed Hereditary in terms of just its imagery
Oh,
and kind of
absolutely,
having a
yeah.
sticking point. Although I like Hereditary, like I like both of them. Both of them are great, but I think I like Hereditary a little bit more. But Midsommar seemed to kind of catch on a bit, and probably that's also to do with, like, you know, Florence Pugh kind of becoming a rising star as well, and people going back and rewatching that, and then, you know, you have your dedicated horror fans as well. So yeah, it's fascinating with that, and again, there are moments of humor throughout both Hereditary and Midsommar, especially with how ridiculous and dark things get. I mean, obviously, like William Poulter, particular in Midsommar, is actually very funny. So
Yeah, I think a lot of horror when it comes to like that's my go-to reaction in a lot of horror movies, because even something like Halloween Ends, I ended up laughing a lot during it, because whether it's like extreme gore, some of intentional jokes, unintentional jokes, jump scares, like my go-to reaction is laughing. And that's like, it's just one of those things, like if something gets me and I jump, then I laugh afterwards because it got me or something like that, which or if something's extremely gory, my reaction, like Nevis has a visceral, like that's disgusting reaction, where I have that disconnect that it's a movie and I'm more impressed with the gore levels, so I laugh at how disgusting it is, rather than have any other reaction. Very rarely like does something get me to kind of go like the paper cuts
everything
in
everywhere all at
everything
once.
almost get me more, because that's like a visceral thing that I have actually experienced that I hate, rather than like, okay, someone getting their face caved in or their tongue cut out in Halloween. Like it doesn't bother me. I just go, holy fuck, that's gory. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, there is that disassociation where it, like, it is kind of almost comically violent to the point where you can, look at that and
Barbarian as well.
yeah, I mean, Barbarian definitely in the sound design in some of these movies as well, where it's so heightened and it's supposed to kind of make you cringe in a way, but it almost makes you cringe in that kind of like awkward kind of comedy manner where it's like you're laughing with or at how ridiculous the heightened aspect and the sensory of a set pieces or a mutilation of a character. Like those scenes are usually like Evil Dead movies are a perfect example of
Yeah,
that, where like everything in those films are pretty goofy, but they're intentionally so. Or even more recently with Malignant, like it's just so over the top, and the movie is very self-aware in its design, but it's playing up to that fact. Where there are films that deal in horror, whether it be real world horror or something that is a little bit more subtle or kind of commonplace, like as you mentioned, getting a paper cut, something that's relatable that might make you wince a little bit more, like even something like just getting blood drawn from a needle. I think I react more to somebody or seeing a needle go into somebody's arm and having blood extract than seeing someone's arm being chopped off, if that makes
I
any
agree. I
sense.
think it's the stuff that you can relate to, like you said, or you can believe could happen to you, right? It's
Yeah,
almost like the scariest horror is shit that you think could happen to you, right? Like, that's why I feel like people have visceral reactions to home invasion movies, or why the first half of Barbarian is very tense, right? Because you could imagine being in a scenario, even just the booking the same Airbnb as someone. That anxiety of that
yeah.
almost feels scarier than something that's supernatural or extremely gory, or something like that. And even to your point of intentional comedy versus, horror and comedy, we've always talked about how similar those genres are. Because it's all set up and kind of execution on the whatever the punchline is, or the scare is, or something like that. um, but then that's why I think horror comedies work so well, is because of that as well, which is, you brought up Evil Dead, even Barbarian to an extent,
Well, Jordan
is very,
Peele, I mean,
yeah,
obviously
Jordan
with
Peele,
what
yeah.
he's been doing, and William Peter Blatty with, The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3, and like Nope has a couple moments in there that are very anxiety, driven, and in that they kind of get you to feel tension and fear, but it's in a way that's also relatable because part of it is claustrophobia in one moment, and that works in a way that you're not expecting it to kind of appear, and then when you
Yeah.
watch it and you see what I'm referencing, you are completely unsettled by it. Where there are horror movies that are kind of playing on that lower register, where it's less about the jump scare or the gore, and it's more about setting a mood or tone. And like rewatching John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, which like John Carpenter in from the 70s into the 80s and in the early 90s, one of the best genre filmmakers, one of the best filmmakers working at that point. The Thing has been reappraised. Halloween was always a classic. There's a lot of people that love Christine. Big Trouble in Little China is a cult classic film. Prince of Darkness seems to finally be generating that a little bit as well. Where with that movie, it's it's fascinating because I was watching the film and then I watched an interview with Carpenter, and he was talking about like he likes to make movies that are filled with doom and gloom, and that he's not afraid to make something that's not going to be palatable to an audience, and also takes its time. And the opening credits of the film span like the first 5 minutes of the movie, and like when it gets directed by John Carpenter, you're like 5 minutes into the film, as the credits are still ongoing, like throughout this 5 minute opening sequence of setting up like this kind of Roman Catholic society that's been hiding this vat of green goo in a basement for 2000 years, and the Brotherhood of Sleep. And you find out that this vat is basically the Antichrist, and how it also kind of is a cross section between science and religion, but it's mostly kind of staged in this abandoned church, and it's a siege film. Donald Pleasance plays this kind of over the top priest that's also very cowardly in the same way that Loomis was in the Halloween films. It just has this mood to it that is very creepy and weird, and there's this broadcast signal that everybody dreams in the vicinity of this tube that is also very creepy and looks like it was shot on video. So there's like, that's a movie that I would recommend to people, that if they're fans of John Carpenter and they've watched the thing now like 7 to 800 times, which is understandable because it's a perfect film. um Prince of Darkness, while it's a little bit slower and more kind of abstract in its style and somewhat expressionistic, it has this interesting kind of approach to what you would think a film dealing with religious iconography could pertain with. And it's not just a possession movie, and it's not just an exorcist film, and it's more heady with its kind of details on sort of subatomic particles and beams and things like that. And Carpenter was interested in all that stuff. And in an interview, he's like, a lot of horror movies don't like to bring in new things and new topics and new ideas, and that's kind of why he felt by the time he reached the end of the 80s that he was a little bit kind of dissuaded by not wanting to continue to make films. And he talked about like how he likes to spend the day reading the newspaper, playing video games, and watching basketball, and that's
Yeah.
like what he likes doing now, and he's fine with that. But when he
Which
was
is cool,
making
but I would
movies,
love for him to do one more. I don't know.
I would too, but like
I
his
don't know if it
last,
would be good because like the
the
ward
Ward was
obviously.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me it's almost like I rather have him just
Do what he
doing what
wants.
he's
Yeah.
doing what he's doing now, maybe compose a piece of music, or give a filmmaker a piece of music he's already written that maybe he had kind of lying around. Because I feel like his scores have been some of the best stuff in the David Gordon Green uh Halloween movies. And even though Firestarter, the remake
He also did the
with
music
Zac Efron,
there.
wasn't great, the music was good. So just let him do what he wants to do. If he wants to direct something, like he keeps saying that he's kind of flirting with the idea of maybe coming back to direct something, but at the same time he's not necessarily bothered by it. And he's one of those guys that's like, he's part curmudgeon and then part, you know basically like you want to like worship the guys at the guy's feet because he made some of the best horror
Yeah.
movies ever. Where it's like, I'm sure like if you met him in person, you probably could only like withstand him for like maybe 10 minutes at most, and he'd kind
Yeah.
of become like such an asshole after a while. But I kind of like that as well, where it's just like, what you see is what you get with him, and he's an artist, but he would never call himself that.
And that's why I think I'd be interested in one more because of his mindset over the last so when was the ward? 2010?
Yeah.
So like the last 13 years or 12 years or whatever. Like it would just be interesting of what would convince him to come back and do one. I know in a
Ghosts of
recent
Mars
interview,
too.
yeah, I know he talked about Dead Space. He's like, "Oh, I would like to make that." Dead Space being a video game, and him doing that, like him doing a video game adaptation, would be interesting because of how much he actually is a gamer and
Yeah.
and how much he actually does give a shit about certain games and stuff like that. Like it's funny. We'll talk about Last of Us in a sec, of course, but there was that whole interview when Halloween Ends was coming out that he did where he's like, "Oh yeah, I got stuck on Last of Us Part 2 and I never finished it." And he didn't know that they were making it into a TV show. And he just seems like he's in his own little world, just like gaming and hanging out, like being retired. So, and sort of retired. Like you said, he does some music once in a while with his son. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so glad we saw him in concert that one time
Oh,
too,
that was
because I
good.
was like, I don't think we'll ever get that chance again. So, I love John Carpenter, and he is, when you think of Halloween movies, obviously he made Halloween, but like, I think he's one of those guys that first pops into your head. So, uh, October is a great time for a John Carpenter movie, but any time is a great time for a John Carpenter movie. I've been itching to watch The Thing. Maybe I'll watch Prince of Darkness now that you mentioned it. Maybe I'll just go through his filmography. That's something like maybe into the new year. I still want to do that, sub show of like, we don't have enough time anyway to do things, but like I would love to do filmography seasons of like, okay, go through this person's filmography, do a season of podcasts on each one. Second season, pick a new filmmaker, go through theirs. because it would just force me to go through and see some of these movies that I haven't seen. Because like I've seen big highlights of people, but there are still big gaps I have in certain great filmmakers' filmographies. So maybe one day we shall see. Did you watch anything else spooky or
Yeah, I
not
mean, I
really?
watched a bunch of stuff on Letterbox that you can go and check out. I watched Cure, which is a Japanese horror film, horror drama. It's a weird hybrid of things, but it's fantastic. And I don't want to give away too much because a lot of people haven't seen that film, and it kind of plays within this weird kind of zone of procedural but also like horror movie. And it's just, yeah, Criterion released it on Blu-ray recently, and it's fantastic. I rewatched Ravenous, which I hadn't seen in a while, which I think was kind of a good one to watch before Bones and All comes out, which is Ravenous is one of those movies that, again, it's such a weird film to kind of describe, but as kind of like a Wendigo cannibal movie that's set in the frontier times with Robert Carlyle and Guy Pearce, and just the tone kind of plays with both horror and surrealism, but then there's also kind of like this darkly comedic aspect that undercuts some of the uh, more kind of brutal violence that's in the movie. But it is one of those fascinating films, and the score is, it shouldn't work, it really shouldn't, but somehow it comes together in a way that's perfect for this film, which is kind of just this juggling act of being both very funny but also sadistic at times with what it is. And I'm just surprised a movie like that got made, and weirdly it's available to watch on Disney Plus, so you can check that out there. And I would recommend that.
Love it. Love it. All right. Moving on. Let's get into the big news, which we did sort of talk about in that lost spoiler cast that I talked about. Let's talk about the
The
state
Plane.
of DC films. Um, yeah. So as I mentioned, like before, Eric and I recorded a entire spoiler cast for Black Adam, which our thesis or our whole point of it was, what is next for the DCEU, or what could they possibly do after that? So I don't at this point, you've probably seen Black Adam. I don't know if you haven't seen it, you probably don't care. We won't fully spoil it, but there's some teases in there that this is very much in the DCEU, and the DCEU is very much is alive and well and going to continue. We then got an announcement on Instagram that Henry Cavill is returning to the role of Superman, rumored to try to do a sequel to Man of Steel or a follow-up, like and basically rebooting the character but being the same character in a new film.
I'll
And
only kill
then
5 people in this one,
yeah.
not thousands.
And then right after we recorded that whole episode, which was like, where could they possibly go? No one's running DC films, like blah 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 blah. It was announced that James Gunn and Peter Safran.
Yep.
I always forget his last name. Peter Safran are co-CEOs and co-leads of what they're now calling DC Films, which is going to be,
Diet Coke Films.
yeah, what they're calling, this basically the Marvel Studios of DC, so DC Studios, with James Gunn at the helm. So, in a situation where James Gunn releasing 2 MCU projects as he is the co-CEO of DC Films, which I think is very interesting and funny. Although they talk about how there's no real competition there and things like that,
Or
but
conflict of interest. That, I mean,
yeah.
it's all product, right? Like, it's all, I mean, this is just a management job in general. It's just exciting to see that Gunn, who has contributed quite a bit to both the MCU and DC in a positive way, especially on the DC side of things with both Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad, now might be able to creatively pursue a new avenue with the DCEU or DC films or whatever you want to call it in a way that might finally break free of Snyder's bullshit for the most part, maybe with the exception of some of the kind of bigger movies like Black Adam. But like, you can see that like with James Gunn, maybe there will be some room for the more obscure or absurd characters to kind of be brought into play and kind of have fun with the genre.
Yeah. I think DC needed James Gunn more than Marvel did, which is
Yeah.
ultimately, and I think
I think DC needed anybody.
sure, but
Somebody, please.
I think James Gunn's a good get, right? Like you mentioned, he's probably made two of the best or the two best DC projects, at least. I mean, Matt Reeves, the Batman. I mean,
But that's
DCEU
not. That's
stuff.
not. Yeah. These. Yeah. Shared
DCEU
universe.
stuff, even though he will be co-leading the entire DC films, which would include the Matt Reeves Batman films and universe, whatever that's going to be moving forward, as well as Todd Phillips' Joker universe. So like he is the guy in charge with Peter Safran, and Peter Safran, you guys might know as he's been a producer on a bunch of DC films. He's producing Aquaman 2 and The Flash, I believe, as well, and he's produced a bunch of DC stuff. So you kind of got the classic producer businessman side of it, and then you have the creative director writer side of it with James Gunn. So I think it's a good combination of those two guys. And I think I'm with you where Peter Safran will probably be the more straightforward. Let's get the big things. Let's try to figure out if everything should connect or how we're going to move forward. And James Gunn will play a part in that because we even talked about on that Lost spoiler cast that Gunn probably had the best use of DCEU characters, whether it's Justice League or other things that he's involved in his movies or shows, both in an irreverent kind of funny way and just in building that universe out. Like, look at how important Amanda Waller has become, which is like she started in that crappy Suicide Squad movie and then it is utilized more and more throughout James Gunn's Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and now Black Adam and showing up everywhere, recording from her iPhone in her apartment.
Viola, do you have like 10 minutes so we can
Yeah.
record this?
So yeah, I think he's a good choice. I think it is funny that he has to go promote and finish two MCU projects while being the head of DC Studios. Like, I do think that is funny. And I don't think that there's a conflict of interest. I think all of that stuff, it's like when there used to be Nintendo versus Sega or PlayStation versus Xbox. I'm using a lot of video game analogies, but people like to pit two companies against each other just because they're making similar things. And yeah, there's always been a rivalry between DC and Marvel, and you want your comics to sell better than the other guys, you want your movies to do better than the other guys, but I don't think they're actively trying to ruin each other or try to make each other fail, because I think one's success, it helps the other as well. Like I think healthy competition is good. I think um really the success of both brands really kind of benefits one another. So like it's not like they're trying to be like, good, I want DC to fail. Like if anything, I think Kevin Feige and Marvel's like, cool, James Gunn did great stuff for us. He made 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and he's going to go over and do his thing over there. Like he was never going to take that job away from Kevin Feige over here, right? So if he was
Yeah.
done with the Marvel universe, right,
Kevin Feige was murdered today.
yeah. So like I don't think that was ever going to be realistic. And there were those rumors that David Zaslav went and asked Kevin Feige if he would leave Marvel Studios to go run DC Studios, and he politely declined, was in the article. So I thought that was funny. I guess that's like a JJ Abrams going from Star Trek to Star Wars kind of thing. But
it goes to show you that a lot of these company guys don't really have any creative imagination outside of like, let's look at what works and take that and apply that to
just do it here. Yeah.
And I mean that's what basically, James Gunn going from Guardians to the Suicide Squad was, because Suicide Squad was ripping off
bunch of misfits, and
Guardians.
yeah.
And then it was just like, okay, well, that didn't work. Well, what do we do for the sequel? Well, let's just hire the
The
guy
guy,
that
yeah.
did it and make it work for us because he made it work for them. And it was an opportunity because of Gunn's firing and then rehiring and apology tour for previous tweets. So you had all that as well. And Gunn, I think, fits just as well in the DC world. And again, like I think with the Suicide Squad, you can tell that he has more of a leeway when it comes to, you know, not only the creative aspect, but how far he can push certain things when it comes to the horror and the violence and the humor of things, and whether or not that's going to work for every project he's working on or putting together or shepherding in some kind of fashion, it will at least kind of feel like, okay, well, maybe there's something more here than just like, okay, well, we have to kind of like force these pieces to fit together in some way or another, because we still have, you know, Shazam 2, Aquaman 2, whatever the hell's happening with the Flash movie, possibly another Wonder Woman film. So those four movies are still, you know, are movies that were being made or developed in, you know, the
Pre-gun yeah.
Saffron era. So it'll be interesting to see when we actually start to feel the side effects of James Gunn and Peter Safran in, you know, their decision making, and like what comes after those
Yeah.
films, and like what is going to be something that is directly like, you know, okay, well, we've announced that this is what we're doing. Because like even, you know, on the DC side of things, it's not the universe stuff. You know, you mentioned Matt Reeves. You know, we're getting an Arkham Asylum series coming up. The Penguin is going into production
Christina
really soon.
Milioti was just cast.
Yeah, of Palm Springs is playing Carmine Falcone's daughter. Sophie's going to kind of be like the rival for Colin Farrell's Penguin. Um, so that, I think, probably was already well in the works before that official announcement was made with Gunn and Safran. So, you know, like it will be interesting to see like what projects are truly theirs, and like what is going to be
Yeah,
like what we have to kind of like, you know, get to the finish line.
I agree, because like they did also only sign 4-year deals. So to me, 4 years is nothing in movie
No.
years. Like 4 years, we might get at the end of that 4-year deal something that they were involved with, right? Because like you got to think all those movies you just referenced are coming out over the next 2 years, right? Wonder Woman's maybe 2 to 3 years out because they haven't even started filming that. So Matt Reeves' next Batman movie, yeah, they'll be involved in that because that hasn't really,
2025.
yeah, but that hasn't started yet either. I guess Joker, Come See Come Saw is coming like in next year. And like they're not really involved in those either, even though they will be the head of DC Studios now. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting because like I'm assuming the 4-year deal is just to see how it goes, right? And I have no doubt that they'll probably sign another 4-year deal after that, as long as, you know, what they're involved in looks good, or at the end of that third or fourth year, you're going to start to see something that they fully produced or directed or were involved with, right? So I don't know. Are they going to get to the Marvel level where you're getting 3 movies a year with 2 TV shows on HBO Max? Like it's possible, but like you also want to be smart about it, because just chasing Marvel Studios has been what hasn't really worked, right? And I'm sure James Gunn knows that. They're not Marvel Studios. They got to do their own thing. So like they are doing their own thing and having multiple different movies that aren't part of the same shared universe, and things like that, and have had, you know, it's just going to be interesting. I don't know, like, because 4 years isn't a long time. I'm sure you'll get a James Gunn directed movie that's coming out in the third or fourth year of that contract. You'll have him involved in a couple other projects. Peacemaker season 2 will come out, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I
And
don't know. I think
who
it's
gets the credit for the projects that were already in development or in production or in post, like
Well, if
if
they go well, they do. If they don't, they go, it was the previous
right.
regime.
But even if it doesn't go well and it's the previous regime, they still will be blamed for it because they're the ones that are manning the
I have
ship,
to
so to
fix it.
speak,
Yeah.
right at the helm. So it's like almost like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if it goes well, well then people can say, well, it wasn't really them that did anything because they were just there to kind of make sure everything got released based on a deadline that they had. And then if it's not successful, they'll be like, oh, well, see, it didn't work. Having a filmmaker come in and be a creative type alongside a more, company driven producer. So it's a weird thing where it's like, it almost feels like you have these 4 years are almost a write-off in a way where it's like as long as the movies do well, like they'll get credit for it, but then there still will be that like, okay, well, they're not really, we're not really seeing what they brought to the table. It will be the next contract if they sign for another additional extension or 4 years or what have you, that will be theirs because they can pitch projects right now. They can start, developing things. And we've even heard that Gunn is working on a secret DC movie right now. So, maybe that will be at the tail end of those 4 years where that comes out. And that's kind of like the beginning of the Gunn and Saffron influence on the DC films universe. But everything that's kind of being made now or is in the works does not feel like it's more like they're just overseeing everything.
Yeah. So until we start to hear what those projects are going to be, it's hard to really, say. It's like yeah, is it a good person for the job? I think so. I'm definitely more interested in DC stuff moving forward, knowing that James Gunn is kind of the one of the guys overseeing everything. Like at least they have that person now. And I know Walter Hamada was that guy before, and obviously that did not work out. And you hope Gunn has a good relationship with actors and directors and producers and writers and like can bring in some interesting talent and it'll be very I'll be very interested to see because we're in that weird spot where it's like it kind of seems like a reset point, but they've set up so much now, even with bringing Henry Cavill back, that you still are continuing. And like you said, those movies that are greenlit is that DCEU of old, right? So what even James Gunn, but he is smart enough that we saw in both The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker to kind of poke fun at what came before and do a reset point, like a soft reboot point, right? Being like, hey, canon is canon. We're going to continue this. And we will try to kind of either poke fun at what came before or reset it in an interesting way. But everything that came before, it still happened, right? Like it's still there. Let's not completely blow this up and start from scratch because there are people who like that continuity. There's a lot of people who don't like that continuity, and the movies are the movies, right? If you can make a good sequel, a great sequel to Suicide Squad, then I think I have faith that he can take the DCEU and do something interesting with it. So I don't think we're gonna get like a full reboot or anything, especially with this Cavill news. And you got to think that that was happening at the same time as the James Gunn negotiations. So you'd hope that he gave his like, yeah, I'm cool with Henry Cavill being the Superman of this universe, and we can continue with this and make something good with that version of Superman. And I know there was those rumors of Christopher McQuarrie maybe taking a meeting about doing a Man of Steel sequel, and that would get me interested. And I hope he brings that type of talent over. Not that I just want those guys to be shoehorned into superhero movies like everyone is. I still hope it goes, one for me, one for you kind of thing. But um yeah, I don't know. It'll be very, very interesting. I have no idea, but I assume the DCEU will continue. And I think James Gunn has done a really fun job of setting his two projects that he's done in that universe and making them feel like they both are a part of that universe, but know what came before. Like, I think they both had a good sense of humor about it. And I'm not saying every project will have that James Gunn humor and everything in it, because I think he'll pick and choose and know how to kind of balance his style with the people he brings in.
Yeah, and we've talked about that with certain Marvel, projects as well, where tone plays a role in what story you're telling. If you're doing something that's more of a one-off that is playing or paying tribute to classic Universal monster movies, then Werewolf by Night works well as that, as kind of a one-off. But I don't think that tone would ever work in a Captain America movie,
Yeah.
like, and so you need to make sure you kind of know the story beats and the mechanics and things like that. So going forward, I do think it will be really interesting to see what is going to remain after. I guess the Flash would kind of be like the last thing that they're
Reset
like.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, because again, like, we're assuming that Flashpoint is going to take some of the continuity that we're familiar with the Zack Snyder stuff, and restructure it, or as you mentioned, the
Reset
soft
people's
reboot.
memories or whatever. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just projecting that on it based on what the comic book adaptations are, because I mean the Michael Keaton stuff might be just even a one-off now because of this, what's happened with Batgirl. So like it still kind of feels up in the air, but at least now you have a couple people that are at the bottom ready to catch what's left and try to put it back together in a way that makes sense, and it's not just going to be some sort of weird Frankenstein cut like the Whedon Justice League movie.
Yeah. No, we don't want that. That's for sure. Um, but it'll be definitely interesting. I'm here for it. Yeah, the other news on that front, we talked about the Penguin show, right? That's
Yeah,
what where Christina Milioti is going to be in that. Um, other
and Craig
DC stuff,
Zobel is
yeah.
directing, or is one of the main showrunners who
Yeah.
just worked on Mayor of Easttown. So
Yeah, which I'm all for. So I'm definitely curious, man. And yeah, maybe Matt Reeves, like, they'll let him do his thing over there, but I know he wants to build out his own Batman universe, so
well, with the
it'll
Arkham Asylum series as well, Antonio Campos, who just recently directed the
right.
Netflix movie
Yeah.
The Devil All the Time, with Robert Pattinson in a role in that movie. So that's interesting in itself, because he's working with people that are independent filmmakers. Craig Zobel kind of came up with David Gordon Green and people like that, and now he's kind of integrated himself more into television with the Mayor of Easttown. But with
Mayor of
Antonio,
Easttown ripped, so like
yeah, and
I'm all for that. Yeah.
yeah, and with Campos, like, he's also another kind of like Sundance indie filmmaker, but it seems like that he's giving him full, the keys to the asylum to kind of play with.
Which is
So
cool, right? Like,
yeah,
it's just different, right? Like that will be that more kind of, we joked about it, but like it's not an indie movie at all, but like it's the Batman having Robert Pattinson. They called it A24 Batman and stuff like that, being a much different tone and vibe and stuff than we've felt from a lot of the DC movies and even Marvel movies. So like I wasn't a huge fan of Devil All the Time. I remember being kind of just mixed, or I remember you brought it up when when they announced this, and I was like, I forgot I watched that movie. It was like beginning of the pandemic, right?
yeah.
Like, I feel like, and then do you think that's gives more of a chance because of him working with Robert Pattinson, that Robert Pattinson might show up in that show? Um,
I wouldn't
and
say
can you
that
do an
it.
Arkham show without Batman?
I mean, you can, I
Like,
guess. I mean,
yeah.
it's the same thing with the Penguin. I mean, that's going to be the same question. Like, where is Batman going to fit into that, and where are the pieces of this show going to fit into Matt Reeves's next Batman movie, which he's just only starting to kind of put together now on a script stage, or at least like an outline. So like it's interesting that Reeves is building this world and kind of flushing things out, and trying to take time to do that, which is good. And having just mentioned it, like I think, like, even in that first Batman movie, the casting is very creative, because it feels like a lot of thought went into who would be best for these roles. And it didn't just feel like, okay, we're, obviously there are actors that have been in other comic book movies, like Zoe Kravitz, but Zoe Kravitz felt much better suited in the Batman than she did in X-Men First Class, and was much more memorable in the Batman, where, obviously the news breaking yesterday about Yaya Abdul-Mateen II being in the Wonder Man series, the Marvel series, where he has just done a stint, and he's in Aquaman too. So it kind of feels like, whether it's the part of producers or the casting directors or whoever, it's just like there's this Rolodex of people. It's like, okay, well, they haven't been in a Marvel movie yet, but they have done a DC, so let's have them do the DC movie now. And we've gotten to that point where, again, comic book films are like action movies. It's not
Mhm.
special anymore in the sense of like, oh, this is my one comic book film I did.
No,
If
it's just
if
another genre now, right? You can do
Yeah,
multiple action movies, you can do multiple superhero movies, and like yeah, the Yaya Abdul-Mateen, the second thing in Wonder Man is interesting because yeah, him playing a prominent villain in Aquaman, he's returning for Aquaman 2. Not the first time, obviously. We've seen heroes on the DC side become villains on the Marvel side, and vice versa, and actors jump around, and I think that goes back to the thing we talked about with James Gunn working on both, right? Like it's not that big of a deal. It
but
was at
it's
first, but
interesting though when it's people that are actively working in both franchises at the same time, where like you could say like, oh well, Christian Bale being in Thor Love and Thunder was weird, seeing Batman become a villain in the MCU, but
yeah,
there had been a bit of time since retiring the cape and cowl that he kind of moved on from it. Where Michael Keaton, there's a similar thing where it's like, okay, well, when he signed on to be the Vulture, it had been decades since he had been Batman in Batman Returns, but then
right.
after the multiverse kind of picked up, it's like, okay, well, let's bring this version of Batman back. So now you do have actors that are, even someone like Randall Park, who's also in Aquaman and in WandaVision and
Oh, right.
in
Yeah. I mean,
Ant-Man
look
and
at
things
James
like that.
bringing it back to James Gunn with Suicide Squad
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Like he's gonna use actors. I'm sure some people that he's worked with, Michael Rooker, obviously, and like
Yeah. I'm sure
which
Dave Bautista
yeah,
will at some point show up in a DC movie that's
yeah.
produced or
So
directed by Gunn.
yeah. So and I'm not super familiar with Wonder Man at all.
Neither am I. Great name
So
though.
yeah, I'm again, and they said it's going to be a series, not a special presentation, correct? And then
Yes. Yeah.
so yeah, I'm all about it. I like Yaya Abdul Mateen. Like I think he's great. So I'm definitely intrigued, and I think I
From Watchman to Wonder Man.
God, he's there's a DC comic thing that he was in as well, right? So
Yeah.
anyways, good for him. Other news or trailers, Eric, what do we want to talk about? Anything big happen in the last couple weeks or what?
I can't think of anything
Um
that's like too outstanding, although we haven't recorded a regular show for a while, so I'm
yeah,
sure there
that's
was
why I'm kind
something
of
that kind
just
of
shooting the shit, right? And just seeing what
yeah.
else we want to talk about. I think the James Gunn thing was the
I'm sure
biggest
something
thing.
will happen as soon as we're finished recording this. There will be a big news
Yeah.
story, as as our luck always seems to turn
You
out.
you mentioned Lupita Nyong'o being cast in A Quiet Place Day One, coming from the director of Pig.
Yeah, which
Um,
was originally going to be Jeff Nichols who directed that, but then
yeah,
he left the project over creative differences. Is making a movie about bike riders. So the director of Pig, Michael Saranovsky, is directing this, and
I love Lupita, and I love I think it's an interesting choice with the director of Pig. So I'm definitely, and I like that universe. Like I know you're not a huge fan of
I think it's fine. I just
you
think that
like
it's like
the
there's
two
not.
movies, you just don't care that much, right?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a lot for world building with this. Like, I feel like A Quiet Place could have been a one and done movie, and it would have been fine. And now
Yeah.
doing this, even though I like Pig a lot, Lupita Nyong'o is an amazing actor. I think it'll be fine, or it probably will be better because maybe it'll play like I could see the producers being like, do what you did with Pig, but for Quiet Place,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but I can see more care going into it, or maybe this director's voice will get lost in the way that a lot of filmmakers who have a successful indie movie kind of catapult them into franchise favor, right down to someone like Colin Trevorrow, where it's just kind of like you kind of lose your way and then you go and make the Book of Henry as a way to atone, and then you make it even worse. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but it just feels like, okay, this is kind of like that classic, like, indie filmmaker does something that kind of has a little bit of that world building background with their directorial debut, their feature length directorial debut, and then let's capitalize on this because they did so well. Like if Nicolas Cage is announced in A Quiet
Oh, that's
Place
all I
day
want,
one,
dude.
then yeah, then
That's all I
that'll be
want.
amazing.
Do you
Because
think? I think it could happen. I'm
oh, I
not
wouldn't.
gonna.
Cage is now, he's back and better than ever. Although he never left, so
That's also true. That's all I want. And then Krasinski coming back with part 3. I liked part 2 quite a bit, but yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if I necessarily needed a Quiet Place universe, but it did so well that I'm not surprised. And I do, you know me, I am a sucker for like post-apocalyptic settings with monsters and that kind of I think the first movie is not perfect, but it's both movies are those movies where when you start to nitpick at some of the logic and different things, the movie does start to fall apart a little bit, but it's just so enjoyable that stuff doesn't bother me. Like it's just like they're both fun popcorn movies to me, where it's like, okay, there is some stuff in there once you really kind of start looking at every nook and cranny, you go, meh, the logic or how this doesn't all kind of add up. But I think it's just so well made that it becomes so enjoyable. But like for Krasinski to get kind of, you know, I'd like to see what he could do outside of that universe, right? Like that's kind of it. Like to be kind of shoehorned into doing now 3 of these movies when he only talked about that he wanted to do 1, and he also came up with the concept for Day Zero. Um, I'd like to see what he would do outside of it, and I know we've seen it here and there. He directed something before Quiet
he's
Place,
directed
didn't
2
he?
terrible
Yeah,
indie movies, Brief
yeah.
Interviews with Hideous Men and The Haulers, and they're both terrible. To be honest, I'd rather him be trapped in A
Trapped in
Quiet
Quiet Place
Place.
because he's actually found his what he's at least somewhat good at.
Yeah, and I don't need to watch some obnoxious, like, indie. I think he's actually directing a movie right now with Ryan Reynolds and is it Steve Carell with like
Oh, he is. Yeah, he did
Imaginary
do.
Friend
There we go.
movie.
So we are getting that. So I
Oh
forgot about
God.
that. Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, we'll see. Who knows? I didn't like his indie movies. I think A Quiet Place is fine. I think A Quiet Place
I
2
guess
is
what I
also
meant is like
fine.
what he would do after Quiet Place, right? Now
Right.
that he's done like a I don't know, a popcorn movie. Like what other popcorn movie would he make? And I have no idea what his next movie is.
I think the guy I'm more interested right now to see what his next move will be is someone like Zach Kreger, where
Yeah.
even he was talking about like he has like a Batman adjacent script that he would love to make. Um,
The
so
hell does that even mean?
I don't know, but
Is
it
it a
was quoted.
Batman movie? Like,
Well,
is
he
it
said
part of
he says he has a Batman adjacent script that he would love to make into a movie, and he would drop everything to do it
I
if he
wonder
was
if it's
given the
in the
green light.
Batman universe, like if he could pivot and do
Yeah,
something
Condiment King.
with Matt Reeves in that universe, but I don't know.
But yeah, but
Um,
going back to A Quiet Place, like I also feel that maybe the productions are kind of getting ramped up a little bit quicker now because it's going to have some competition and comparisons to the Last of Us series, which it also very much probably took influence from. So there's that to consider as well. And I think as we're looking at superhero fatigue and world building fatigue, the one aspect or the one sort of corner that has done very well and we haven't been bombarded with them is the James Wan Conjuring universe.
mhm.
It was the thing that kind of beat the
DCEU,
dark,
yeah,
yeah, the dark universe,
yeah.
and so I almost feel like the Quiet Place world building is also a little bit in capitalizing on the success of what Wan has had, and not really having much of a rival to sort of get anybody really kind of interested in anything else other than the Conjuring stuff. It's like the Conjuring stuff. It's like it has its audience. Nobody's going to be like, oh well, I like I like Tom Cruise's The Mummy movie more than the Warren films. It's like no one ever will say that. But now
Yeah.
you have some interest in Universal trying to revamp the Universal monster movies with obviously the Invisible Man, but I don't know what's going on there. And then Renfield's coming out next year with Nicolas Cage as Dracula and Nicholas Hoult as Renfield. So like maybe that's going to be the start of where Universal's going to build up their monster movies
Yeah,
again.
like
But
these horror shared universes, because like
yeah,
we are getting the Nun too.
yeah, they're
Um,
cheap, they're easy
and
to make,
then
they
Crooked
make a
Man
lot of
still
money.
coming or what?
We can only hope.
Um,
But there's a Conjuring 4 that's going into production. So
yeah, I mean
yeah, like
Peter Safran, I think it was one of the producers on some of the Conjuring movies, right? So
yeah,
it all comes full circle, kind of. I think he was involved in some of them, or he's involved in some of the ones coming up, but um, I think he was. Yeah, he started with Annabelle, and then has produced a lot of them moving forward.
great
Um,
movies.
Hey, I mean,
But
sure,
they
but
do
like
well. They do
that's what
really
I mean.
well.
So if
Yeah.
DC sees that, and that DC, or not DC, well, Warner Brothers Discovery sees
Yeah.
that the Conjuring universe was their most successful shared universe,
Right.
then why not bring in Safran, who had some success with that stuff as well?
And
And
other studios are
um,
looking at that. Like Paramount's looking at that and being like, "Oh, well, A Quiet Place can be our Conjuring universe,"
mhm.
Or Universal now is like, "Okay, well, the Dark universe didn't come together, but maybe we can, take the Invisible Man, maybe we can take
Dark Universe
Renfields,
V2.
yeah, and do something smaller, cheaper, and more idiosyncratic than before." And like even like hearing about like there hasn't been much movement on it, but like Derek Cianfrance, directing a Wolfman movie with Ryan Gosling, like these films feel like they are also building to something. And even with the Invisible Man, the Lee Wanell movie, it did feel like there was basically a sort of an allusion to what could come.
Weren't they working on another one, like
Well,
with
Elizabeth Banks was,
yeah.
yeah, the Invisible Woman, I believe, was
And
was
is
the
that
title.
happening,
I don't
or
know. She
I
went
thought they
from
were shooting it already
she
too, but
went from
like
it was almost like a roulette table of projects for her at Universal, where it was like, I'm going to direct this YA movie that's kind of based on Alice in Wonderland, and then that didn't happen, and it's like I'm going to do the Invisible Woman that doesn't have anything to do with the Invisible Man, but also will be something that is potentially a platform kind of movie that will spring off into a shared universe, and then that didn't happen. And then she landed on the film that she made, which I think is coming out in February, Cocaine Bear, which is a bear that's on
oh
cocaine
right, yeah, with
rampage
Phil Lord
with
and
Phil Lord
Chris
and Chris
Miller
Miller. Yeah, and it's
producing,
I think
right?
it's Ray Liotta's last on-screen performance.
Huh. Yeah, I forgot about Cocaine Bear.
Yeah.
Um, Interesting, man. Yeah, horror shared universes, like, yeah, I guess The Conjuring's the one that really took off, but Quiet Place, I just don't, unless you'll see variants of the monsters, I guess, or like in any post-apocalyptic story where the humans are worse than the monsters, kind of thing. Like there are different things you can do, but I do agree with you with the Last of Us stuff where we already compared it to that, and
And now
we're
we're getting it, and it's kind of like, okay, well, I could see people that are more familiar with A Quiet Place looking at The Last of Us and not knowing that it's a video game adaptation, and being like, oh, are they just ripping off A Quiet Place, in that way, or preferring A Quiet Place because they've only seen A Quiet Place.
Yeah, even the clickers in The Last of Us, their design, I mean, it's more because they have like fungus growing out of them. Um, but they don't see, and they go off sound. So
Yeah,
it's there are a lot of similarities even in the production design of how the I mean, a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff all looks the same. It's greenery grown over buildings and shit like that, but
yeah.
using iconic landscapes and going, oh my god, it's all fucked.
Richard
Um,
Matheson with I Am Legend, like
yeah.
it's been done. There's common tropes and cliches within that subgenre that it's like you've seen it once, you've seen it 100 times before. Sometimes though, one catches on more than the others, and then that one also influences so much more. And especially when you have it in a different medium like a video game, where you've talked about this, where not everybody's played it, so not everybody's aware of the influence that they're getting through the video game, but from a secondhand kind of perspective, where like
Right.
you're seeing the Maze Runner movies, or It Comes at Night, or Quiet Place, referencing The Last of Us, but not being familiar with that.
Yeah. Yeah. We're also getting a new Insidious movie. Isn't Patrick Wilson directing it?
Yep. That's
That just
probably how they lured him back to do it, where it's like, I
yeah.
mean, obviously he's good friends with James Wan, but like it's like Patrick, how do we get you back to make another Insidious movie? It's like, well, I don't know, guys. Like I'm like, James, like I appreciate that we're still working together and that I'm in the next Aquaman movie. It's like, what if I let you direct Insidious 4? Sold.
Is it the fourth one? Oh yeah, the third one was like the key or whatever, wasn't it? Or like
Yeah,
the I forget what the hell it was called, but I didn't even see the third one. So
I sure did, and I
um
cannot really remember anything about it other than it was not great.
yeah, I forgot it even existed. I like the
But
first
those
one
movies
enough,
as
but
well, again, very cheap, easy to make. You release them in January. There's not a lot of competition. It's good counter programming. The guy who directed that last Insidious movie also directed the Escape Room film. So, like
oh,
it goes to show you that like you can,
are we gonna get
you
another
know,
one of those?
I'm sure we will. I don't know how well that second Escape Room movie did, but the first one did a lot better than Sony was even predicting, to the point where there's like, we need to fast track a sequel. So, and I mean, you mentioned already, or we were talking, when we were going to the Black Adam event, where there is the director's cut, or
Yeah, which completely
theat-
changes the story
versus
of
the
the second one.
theatrical. Yeah,
Yeah. So I have no idea like if they continued which version they would go with, but probably the theatrical ones, but um I don't know.
yeah.
Um I know we've done it's November 1st everyone, but we're still in the Halloween mood. We're talking about a lot of horror stuff on this episode. We'll get to Christmas stuff soon enough. There's plenty of time. I know Christmas music will start
Oh
playing
God.
everywhere. And you're not, are you a Christmas guy at all?
No, we've
No?
talked about
Yeah.
this. No, I don't mind it in the sense of like, you know, rewatching Home Alone for the 800th time or something like that. And I don't mind it in small quantities, but after working at Toys R Us,
Right. Right.
I cannot listen to Christmas music anymore. I can't tolerate it on any level. Like, I will leave the room. I will ask somebody to change the station if we're in a car. It's just, I can't do it, and that's why I'm also never having children. So like, Toys R Us really helped, I guess, and if there's a silver lining, making that decision for me. But yeah, there's just something about like when you work seasonally in Toys R Us in high school, and you have the same 7 songs playing on loop for an 8-hour shift during a weekend, for 2 days back to back, you will begin to realize that the season, no matter how much positivity you want to put in the world, there is a little bit of a Scrooge in each and every one of us. So
I love it. Last thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention in the what we've been watching. White Lotus season 2 started. If you haven't watched the first season, go back and watch it. Started off where I was like, do I like this show or not? And then I like it continued to win me over. And I think season 2, the first episode is great. It takes place in Sicily this time, where the first one was in Hawaii. Um, it it's definitely a follow-up, but it's almost, they're not quite like Agatha Christie murder mysteries, but like each season it seems like will take place at a new location, where this hotel chain must be like, we got to have people stop being murdered at our resorts, or else we're gonna have to close down. Like and
why
like
doesn't this happen at a Best Western?
yeah, like if this White Lotus resort is just gonna start getting known for someone gets murdered there at least once a year or once every couple years, I feel like they don't have a long
Shelf life, I
shelf
guess.
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I really liked, I think the casting is fantastic, both in the first season and this one. I think Aubrey Plaza's killing it already in that first episode. I will say, Theo James, his voice doesn't match his face. Just like, he has such a deep ass voice that I just don't expect to come from that dude's. And it's not like I think he should have like I don't know what it is, but it's just like, you ever see someone and you're like, your voice doesn't match you, and not in a bad way because he's got a
I think that
great
sometimes
voice.
happens even when you're listening to a podcast and you have that what do they call it? It's like a disassociation
Yeah.
where you listen to a voice for so long on the radio or again podcasts or what have you, and then you see the people that are actually behind the voices, and it's like, oh, that wasn't like the person I would have never put two and two together, and it's just very weird. Where I know what you're talking about, where like, yeah, he has that kind of deep kind of voice, but he also looks like kind of like a run of the mill male model type or
Yeah,
something
so
like
it's
that.
just like one of those things where I'm like, I don't know, your voice just doesn't match what I envision from you, but I sure. But yeah, I think he's been all right in the first episode too.
Heard he has big dick energy.
He sure does. Gotta love F. Murray Abraham. Jennifer Coolidge comes back in this season, so I'd also be like, how can people keep getting murdered at this resort while you're here?
But you know what?
Um,
It's like, R.I.P. to Angela Lansbury, but it's like Murder She Wrote,
yeah.
right? Where like the joke was like, how come like every time she's going somewhere, someone always gets murdered? Like the joke was she was the true murderer behind it all.
Yeah. So Michael Imperioli, who I feel like I haven't seen in a while. Like what?
How dare you, sir? He
Did we
was
see
in
him something?
Watchmen.
Oh, he is great in Watchmen, dude. And
And then
he
he was also
is
a
in
voice.
Many
He was
Saints of Newark
you
and One
were
Night in
yeah.
Miami but I just feel like he's someone I haven't like paid attention to in a long time. So it was like
I guess the
nice.
last big role he had, and when I mean big, like movie role,
Yeah, he was in
was
that one
probably
episode of Watchmen, right?
yeah, and he was playing himself, and it was like an ad for coming back to New York or
God,
something like
Watchmen's
that.
so fucking good. I gotta watch that show again.
Yeah, Hong Chow as well. Like it's amazing that cast.
Am I gonna start Watchmen again tonight? I might.
Maybe. But The Lovely Bones, I think, was like the last kind of like big role he had where he was the police officer kind of investigating Stanley Tucci, but kind of didn't have enough evidence to work with. But obviously he's like, I mean, he's amazing as Christopher on The Sopranos, and like the way he says like T, yo, T, what do
Yeah.
you think, T? Um
And he was in Spike Lee's Old Boy.
oh, he's
Um,
in a few Spike Lee movies, yeah.
yeah. So,
And I mean he was Spider in Goodfellas, he gets killed by Joe Pesci.
yeah, sure, but I just mean in like the last little while. I haven't seen him in like a lead role like this in like in a while, right? And,
Yeah.
I love Haley Lou Richardson as well. Like I mentioned, Aubrey Plaza is great. Um, you got Will Sharp in there. Um,
Is John
uh,
Grease back?
yep, John Grease is back.
I love John Grease.
John Grease is great, man. Um, my love for Lost, him as Roger Linus.
Well, he's also the Wolfman in Monster
Monster
Squad, and
Squad,
he's
hell
in
yeah.
Fright Night 2, and yeah,
John
he had
Grease
an
is great.
amazing mullet in the 80s.
Did you
Incredible.
watch White Lotus season 1 or
No, I
no?
haven't.
Yeah,
I haven't had time. Matt, I'm a movie guy. That and The
I know.
Rehearsal. I haven't watched Hot D yet.
It's okay. I mean, I'm
Or The Bear.
there's a funny conversation and like why I love the White Lotus too is just it's satirization of just elites and society, and like some of it's a little on the nose, and I even in the first season I thought that, but um they have this conversation about that there's too much content, too much TV. There's a Ted Lasso joke and stuff like that too between, this more right-leaning couple and a more left-leaning couple and stuff like that. So like some of Mike White's commentary can be very obvious, but I think the way that, I give him the benefit of the doubt because in the first season I was kind of like, is this working? I don't know. But then as the season played out, I thought it worked a lot better of satirizing and a topic we talked about a lot of like social elites and stuff like that, of like the takedown of those people that we've seen in, Glass Onion coming up soon. We saw in Triangle of Sadness, in a bunch
Well,
of
you
things
mentioned
that
The
like
Menu,
the
like
menu. Yeah, I
yeah,
think this is an ongoing kind of theme
Adam
in.
McKay in general.
Yeah, so I think that, Mike White does a pretty good job with it, and I think the first season, as like both a murder mystery and just kind of a satirization of social elites, is pretty good. And it seems like this season continues that, so I'm really enjoying it. And then to lead off that, it looks like that's going to lead into the new year, and then we got a Last of Us rumored release date of January 15th. It like leaked on HBO Max that it was like on one of their
Leaked.
descriptions. So I don't know, man. Like HBO's been crushing it. Hot D is great. So um all these shows kind of continuing or coming back. I'm here for. But yeah, you got to watch White Lotus, man. But there's too many. Like again, it's literally repeating the conversation that they have in the first episode of the show, where there's just like there's so much. But
Yeah, there's pockets of every year it seems like there are times where it's like I can fit in a couple of TV shows, especially if we have access to the majority of them, and it almost seems like it's like late winter, early spring is like the best
your
time
catch
for
up
that kind
time
of
for
stuff.
you,
So
yeah,
like the After Party and Severance, which actually just got some casting news as
yeah.
well, with John Noble and Gwendolyn Christie and things like that. So like that seems to be the best time. Or then like even with The Rehearsal, which was kind of in that period at the end of summer into the fall, and it just kind of fit right before you know the festival season kind of began. So there are periods throughout the year, but it's like if I miss them, it's hard for me to go back and watch a show, unlike a movie where it's again the commitment times are different. So or unless it's something that I'm just so pot committed already on, like a Star Wars or a Marvel show where I've
You
watched
feel
all of
like you
this.
need to be in the
Yeah.
moment as well, where some of these shows, like, yeah, people really love, but it's not necessarily that thing you need to be part of the conversation. Like you'll catch up when you need. I guess Hot D is different. You might have but you were always someone who liked to wait and catch up after they were
Yes,
done, right?
some shows I'm more interested in kind of just going through as if they were an extended movie or an overlong film, especially when you have shows like Game of Thrones where like I think you can kind of watch it that way and kind of get through it in a way where you can still stop and resume later on, obviously, and I've done that, but it kind of feels like it's more interesting to kind of watch it in not a binge watch kind of way. Sometimes there is that like, oh, you can get through it in a day, like Cobra Kai, or ridiculous at a short amount of time. um but there is just something where it's like it's all done and it's ready to go, and whenever you're ready for it, you can kind of watch it and follow it. And I'm not worried about spoilers because I've never been bothered by like having things ruined. It's more so just how they happen that I'm more interested in
Yeah,
seeing than
totally.
what happens.
You will watch Last of Us week to week with me though, right? So you better.
No, no.
Um, thank you all for listening or watching. We really, really do appreciate it. We'll be back with another episode early next week where Eric and I will talk about our experience at the Black Panther Wakanda Forever press conference, which will then lead into our Black Panther Wakanda Forever review that will be next week. So stay tuned for that. That should be awesome. You can check out Eric and I's impressions of Black Panther on our social media accounts, which is at Matt Rohrbeck and at EM6211. It's always in that weird space where there's no social embargo, but there is a review embargo. So you can go to social media and the hellscape that is Twitter to go find our
Yeah, it's smelling
thoughts
a little
on.
musky over there, if
I
you know what I
hate it. I
mean.
hate it. And then go check out our other episodes of Untitled Movie Podcast and Untitled Movie Reviews. We have a review up right now for Tales of the Jedi, James Gray's Armageddon Time. We have an After Sun review, The Good Nurse, the aforementioned Black Adam. We have a full spoiler-free review if you want our thoughts on that. If you're still in the Halloween mood, Halloween Ends. There was a great conversation between Eric and I, who are on that side of Halloween Ends kind of rips.
History will look fondly on us, Matt.
The Tar Wars, Eric and I fighting over Tar. There's Amsterdam and Werewolf by Night, tons of stuff over there. So go check all of that out. One stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterbox, which is Untitled_movies.
Yes, and I'm Eric Martin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. I have an interview up right now that you can watch with After Sun writer-director
It's
Charlotte
great. Everyone go
Wells.
watch that.
And After Sun is now playing in limited release, so if it is playing near you, please give it a shot. It is really lovely, and you can follow me on all the social medias at em6211.
Until next time.
I just wanna fly, wicka 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 wah wah wah, put your arms around me, baby.